I'm, as she said, Tom Sheaff. I'm with Lennar, Mare Island. Go ahead, Henry. Okay. And then I have been working on this project off and on for about the last 20 years, which in many respects is not great from a development standpoint, but when you understand the difficulty with base closure and base reuse, very similar to Alameda Naval Air Station, Treasure Island, Hunters Point, Concord, etc. It becomes a pretty difficult and daunting process because the infrastructure is really old. There's still environmental contamination and cleanup to deal with. But yet we've been making a lot of progress along with the city of Vallejo and the state of California on a lot of different things out here. This is the school district building, by the way, the administrative offices for the school district. This is Rodman Center. This is where Netflix has been doing the filming for their auditorium scenes, if anybody has seen Netflix. This will turn right and then the next left.
You're talking about 13 Reasons Why?
13 Reasons Why, yes.
It releases today.
Oh, it does for the next season? Yeah, so there's been a lot of filming out there from last season, and then they should be starting season, I guess, 4 coming up here in the probably the next 30 days or so. I wanted to take you guys up to the North Island initially. So this is our property on this side of G Street, and then this is what we call the North Island. And you may have read in the newspapers, you can slow down just a little bit. You may have read in the newspaper recently where the city of Vallejo just selected a developer called the Nimitz Group. The Nimitz Group is made up of about 3 individuals, including Dave Finney. If anybody knows wine, you know Orange Swift Wine, The Prisoner, those brands for the Napa Valley. And they've got some really exciting plans for the North Island. It will include the demolition of all the buildings up here on this side. Much different from the south side, where there's a lot of historic buildings. There are no historic buildings up here, and so you can demolish all of these buildings. This street that we're on right now will be either a 2 or 4 lane parkway, and instead of being 1-way, it'll be 2-way, and then the street next door, Walnut Avenue, will most likely go away. It's a long-term development. It'll take many, many years, probably another 3 or 4 years before you even see any new construction. But it will really enhance the city of Vallejo. This is, because of Highway 37, one of the 4 or 5 front doors, so to speak, of the city. And it has a big impression on what people see initially. And so we're really excited about it because obviously we think that will create a lot of more momentum for us on our property on the other side.
Excuse me, do you know if
Go ahead
that
and
deal
you'll
are
see
they
the
addressing?
lines up here, so just make that clear. Just basically down the industry. Yes, sir.
In that deal, are they addressing the infrastructure, the overpass, and specifically the Mare Island Causeway?
The infrastructure that I know is going to get addressed will be on site. So all of the wet and dry utilities on site. Whether or not Highway 37 needs to get dealt with or not is still going to be subject to some discussions with Caltrans. Yes, right here. Just turn left in. Got it. All right.
The bridge?
Just didn't want to get back on Highway 37.
I know.
All right. We may get, if you've seen Highway 37, we're going to get stuck in a bunch of traffic on the other side.
Thank you.
So we'll be back before dinner. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And then just a lift bridge. Is there any discussion about?
So the lift bridge is currently being paid for by a special tax on the island. So 100% of the costs of the bridge are being paid by Mare Island stakeholders, which would include us, the businesses, the residential, and eventually the developer up here. Just over here very quickly is Alco back on the corner, and then earthquake protection systems. Earthquake Protection Systems is a really fascinating company. They do seismic retrofitting throughout the world and have done a lot of work for Apple on their new campus. All of the seismic bracing, in essence, some discs that are under every pillar in that new building were built here and on Mare Island. Then when you get down here, you want to turn to the right at the stop sign and then left on the patio. Yes, ma'am.
Where is that soundstage? It said.
So we'll take a look at the soundstage. No, it's not up here on the North Island, but part of the question was, where's the soundstage? Part of the proposal by the Nimitz Group for the North Island is actually to include an expansion by the company that operates it, to put a new soundstage and new film studio on the North Island.
Are they raising this too?
Yeah, those we call that the Howard Johnsons, the old Howard Johnson, for all those people who are old enough for that. Unfortunately, they had to remove all the doors and take out the windows because there was a really significant ongoing homeless problem. And unfortunately, one of the challenges with the homeless is that not all of them are just down on their luck homeless. There was unfortunately a very significant criminal element to it, and a lot of our businesses and residents were suffering the effects of that. So this is Azure Drive. This runs almost the length of the island. All of this area is wetlands. So Mare Island is a total of about 5,000 acres, and only about 1,200 of it, the North Island, our piece, and then the golf course, only about 1,200 acres is actually developable. So it's mostly open space. You can go ahead and slow down a little bit here. So these are examples. Again, this is the back of the school district here, but these are all examples of historic buildings that will be kept, including this one right here. You look at the building like that and you say not much is going on, but Avery Green stores all of their extra Hondas in that building. So at any one time there's about 100 to 300 Hondas in that building. So that's where they store them when they run out of space on their lot. Another doggy daycare over there on your left. One of the more successful businesses out here. You'd be interested to know that doggy daycare generally costs more than people daycare. A+ Tree Company. This building will ultimately be demolished, but in the meantime we do a lot of interim leasing, and then back behind that was the sports center operated by GVRD. This is the beginning of a commercial area over here, but interestingly enough, the Navy still owns this property. They're still in the final stages of cleaning it up environmentally, and then that will be transferred at some point in the future. But one of the things that most people don't realize is the amount of property yet to be transferred by the federal government to put back into reuse. And so when you look around and you say, gee, why isn't anything going on there? A lot of times that's the reason why. This is an area over here where there also will be a lot of demolition, still commercial. And then once you get to this green fence up here, that really is the demarcation between commercial down in this area and then residential down here. So you go a little faster. But in the meantime, we use it for a lot of interim uses. This is Pinnacle Power, which you see their trucks all over the Bay Area. They do a lot of major infrastructure work throughout the Bay Area. And then, like I said, this is a residential area. Interestingly enough, it was the former train maintenance and motor pool area for the island. So it was one of the most contaminated in the past, and it required a lot of dig and haul. But it's been cleaned up to unrestricted use, which means that it's suitable for residential reuse. And then turn right here. Yes?
The wetlands over there, are some of those going to be preserved in the development?
Yes, all of those wetlands. The question was, are the wetlands going to be preserved? And the answer is that all of the wetlands that you see today will be wetlands in the future. And that was a major part of what the city was looking for, was to preserve that open space. At one point it was dredge ponds, and there was a plan at one point to turn it back into dredge ponds, but it was taken out of the specific plan about a decade ago, so it'll always be wetlands. The downside to that is that there's a little bit of a funding issue that the city of Vallejo has to address eventually due to that. But this area here is all wetlands, and as a result of that, you can imagine these are some of the most popular homes on the entire island, because this will always be wetlands. You've got a view literally outside your front door of Mount Tamalpais, and when the downturn hit and the city and the county had about a 40% foreclosure rate, Mare Islands was a lot less than that, and one of the reasons was, people really liked these homes, wanted to stay in these homes at all costs. Over on your left, you see an existing elementary school that was here when we got here. We enhanced that site quite a bit, and it still operates as the Mare Island Health and Fitness Academy, which is a focused elementary school for K through, it's an 8 or 5, or K through 8? Okay. On your right is part of our original neighborhood. We're still suffering a little bit from the downturn. These homes originally sold in the $700,000 to $800,000 range. They're now just bumping up pretty consistently back up to about $600,000 or maybe $650,000. But the city of Vallejo is still 10, maybe even 20% below the 2006 peak in terms of home building value. Infrastructure-wise, these are all areas where brand new infrastructure was put into the ground.
How many people
Yes.
live in the community here?
There's about 324 homes, including the new community, which we'll see up on the hill. And at 2 or 3 per home, you get to roughly 1,000 people. With Toro students renting out here, which is quite a bit, there's probably a few more than that. Then there's 40 apartments over in this area.
And is there any plan for like a grocery store?
There is. Retail is certainly part of the plan. We need more rooftops in order to get to that point.
More rooftops mean more homes?
More homes, yeah. Businesses are important, but retailers really look at the surrounding residential community as the number one thing. So we just passed through area that was still owned by the Navy. That's all of this area is going to be residential. This is probably one of the next neighborhoods over here, which is going to be 48 single-family homes. Those, you can slow down just a little bit. These 3 homes over here are going to get moved back to their original location next to M1, which is the main doctor's quarters, and then these homes were for the Marine Corps commandants and things like that. This coming up on your right was the Marine Corps barracks. So just like all military bases, Mare Island had its own MP and police squad, and so this was their building. Had a firing range in the basement, had a jail in the basement, had its own little armory in there, and up from the 3rd floor of that building is some of the best views on Mare Island, as you can imagine. On your left is a 180 condominium site, so that's what will be on that location there. And then coming up on your left is the first new neighborhood that was started really after the downturn.
Are they
Yes,
going
sir.
to remodel or renovate the barracks?
Yes, yeah, so we're going through, you can see some work going on in there right now. The first thing that we have to do, I'm right up near that white super, just pull off to the right for a second. One of the very first things we have to do on all buildings is, very simple stuff like clean them up for lead-based paint and asbestos. Of course, they all have lead-based paint and asbestos. We have to put meters on them. The Navy had 1 electricity meter, 1 water meter, all back at the causeway. And so most people don't quite have to start at that level, but that's where we have to start on all these buildings. Then you get into roofs and structural, and it's that's where you start from the basics, and then you sort of go from there. We can stop here. I was gonna. I don't know if you guys. How much time do we have?
We have till about 11:45.
Okay. So I was going to get out more down in the commercial area, just because I think it's a little bit more interesting to. If we were to go into the models, the Lennar salespeople would probably kill me. But I'm sure you've all been in a model home. These are roughly 28 to 3,500 square feet. Many of them have Lennar's next gen concept in them, which is very, very popular and has become more and more popular recently. It's essentially a home within a home for, originally designed for parents But now we've got children coming back, and we've got cousins moving in, and we've got friends, and so on and so forth. And it's actually a separate entrance with a separate bathroom, with a separate small kitchen, and a separate clothes washing machine and things like that. And so they're very, very popular. Really throughout the country. More popular in Arizona, where there's more retirees, but they're becoming very popular here in California too. These people always ask, so I'll put it out there. They started in the mid 600s, and by the time between the homes, you can see up at the top of the hill, by the time they made it to the top of the hill, they were about 950. So this is the next neighborhood over here, another 65 single-family homes, along with 28 attached units, kind of down back to your right on the other side of the wall there. You can see that we purposely step them so that you can always, from the second floor, get at least a little bit of a view out there. Down at the end, where you can see those large concrete structures, that's the edge of the neighborhood, and you can see it's elevated. So those homes will have every bit as good of views as those up there. In fact, from my perspective, they'll be better because you won't have another home to look at. You'll just be out looking at wetlands. And so we're really excited to be able to continue that neighborhood. Two other big projects that are taking place that you can't really see. On the other side of those concrete structures is the stormwater retention. As many of you know, in the state of California, stormwater retention is a huge deal, just like air quality from an environmental standpoint. And so there's a very sophisticated stormwater detention facility going on out there. And then over where some of the maybe the white trucks are, where the water truck is now, there's a sewer pump station. So we have to deal with gravity out here, and we have to pump the sewer back over to a main sewer pump station that is back in the commercial area. So there's about a $2 million sewer pump station which will handle this entire side of the island and get that back up here. So any questions on the residential? And part of our obligation, the city of Vallejo, is to construct all these public improvements. The city's benefit is that they get the tax revenue. That's really what the city's after. They three primary sources of tax revenue for most cities and counties: property taxes, utility user taxes, and retail sales. So back to the retail sales question, we hope to be able to meet that tax criteria soon, but certainly utility user taxes and property taxes are something that is getting produced right now on Mare Island. So we can go ahead.
Tom,
yes?
are there any discussions of the rising tides with climate change?
Yeah, so sea level rise is obviously a big issue in the city of Vallejo, certainly throughout the Bay Area. On this side of the island, we've been fortunate that we're above most of those scenarios in most areas. There are some low spots, mostly back by the causeway. But up here, this is not an issue in these areas. But yes, it's something that we have to consider as we move forward.
And how are sales going?
Sales have been going very, very well. Most in neighborhoods like this, you really look at a volume of 2 to 4 a month is good. 3 or 4 is better. And but sales have gone well. Yeah. We're not going to go up we're going to turn left here. We're not going to go up the hill. These are still model homes from Blue Homes. Even though Blue moved out of the main factory down in the area, they still are in operation. They have their models here. Then you can see the Forest Service up on the hill, and then the golf courses on the other side. On our right, your right, is Toro University. Toro arrived here in 1998, 1999, somewhere back in there. Not knowing a whole lot about them at the time, but they've been a real great asset, I think, that not only Mare Island, but the Solano County in general. They employ 350 to 400 people who it's a very diverse workforce, which is really great, which is exactly what you want. They've got about 1,500 students. Those students, I mean, it's a graduate school program. It's not cheap, and they rent space. They buy goods and services here in Vallejo, and they're another reason why we felt like on Mare Island there was a less than, as compared to the market, the foreclosure rate was a lot less because they offered the ability for some of these homeowners to rent rooms to Toro students. Yeah, left, thanks. This is Club Drive Park. This is, like many areas on Mare Island, it's not just buildings that are historic. There are landscaped areas, the waterfront, dry docks, things like that. So we just pulled a permit for the renovation of this park. Well, I'm not sure we pulled a permit. I saw the check request go through just yesterday. So a permit on a park renovation is over $150,000, but we should be getting started on that in the next 30 days or so. So as we go through and we develop, then we follow with parks. Go ahead and turn right down here. These are existing historic homes. This was for the people that ran the hospital, where Toro is today. And we try and get people to buy them for not just a good value, but we actually interview buyers of historic homes out here because it's very important for us that they move forward and have the capital to complete the project. It's always a little dangerous getting people who really love and are passionate about renovating historic homes but don't have the capital to do it. Then you find that there's scaffolding up 2 or 3 years after you sold the building. So one of the biggest challenges on Mare Island is compatibility. You've got Toro here, residential here, and you've got probably one of the most heavy industrial users on the island out here. And so eventually there will be a mixture of sound walls and landscaping and berms that will protect both sides really from each other on a go-forward basis. And you want to turn left, right where that truck is passing. Next street to the left. So when Mare Island was closed, even back in the 1980s, there were about 10,000, maybe 12,000 people working here. And then when it closed, of course, all the businesses along Tennessee Street and other places were really hurt. And so the city's main focus was job generating uses at the outset. And so right now we've got over 100 businesses. There's about 110 businesses on Mare Island and about 2,500 permanent jobs. That doesn't include Toro students at another 1,500. It doesn't include contract employees. It doesn't include people that come and play golf or anything like that. So we figure there's about 5,000 people a day that come on and off Mare Island. If you can just stop for a second. I didn't know that door was going to be open. If you can back up just for a second. So this is another example of a business that people don't even realize that it's here. This is Chevron. And Chevron has been leasing this building for the last, I'm guessing, 4 or 5 years or so as a result of their reconstruction projects going on at the refinery down in Richmond. So they essentially store a lot of materials here. They're in the process of completing that, and they're going to be moving out, which is what they're doing right now. And so this building will be back on the market. So when we look at a building like this, now that we're at this stage where we're at an interesting moment in time, the environmental cleanup and the market are now cooperating. They're sort of coming together at the same time, along with the momentum that we've got. So we've got a lot of new businesses opening up here. We've got residential starting again. We've got the North Island with a new developer up there. So in order to get this building, all the metering done, well, the metering's done here, but just ADA accessibility, a new roof on it, renovating some of the office space, putting in the bathrooms, and doing some other work, we'll probably put in $1 million or more in this building by October, just to get it ready for the next user. The great news is that, as you can see by looking in there, buildings like this don't get built anymore. It's really just too expensive, especially in the Bay Area, to build these kinds of facilities. So we would be willing to do that on a speculative basis, because we feel confident that we'll be able to get another user in here. The value of these buildings are the clear height. There's a massive amount of electricity that's been pulled to that building. The cranes, there's probably a 30 or 40,000 pound crane. I think there's actually 2 of them in that building. And so they're very unique assets in the Bay Area. And with all the construction going on, we benefit greatly from all the bridge work that goes on in the Bay Area, from all the construction in downtown San Francisco. For example, on the Transbay Terminal, there was probably 8 to 10 businesses on Mare Island that supplied goods or services for the Transbay Terminal in San Francisco. So, in fact, even the, go ahead, you can turn to the left up here. Even the new Muni line from 3rd Street to Chinatown, once we turn this corner, you'll see the equipment that's tarped over in the blue. That was the company that did the boring for all of the tunnels. So all the boring equipment, they don't have another tunnel to dig at the moment, so they brought it all here to store rather than truck it all the way back to their headquarters in Ohio. So we get the benefit of a lot of construction out here.
Where does everybody eat at lunchtime?
Well, there's the golf course. There's 2 or 3 really good food trucks that are out here. The VA has a small cafeteria, and the school district has a small cafeteria.
So does Jerome.
And so does Thoreau. That's exactly right.
And they're all public if you're out here?
Yeah, yeah. So you can.
What's your favorite?
I like the Mexican food trucks myself.
Orange one's
Yeah.
the best one. One on that end.
Yeah, that's what everybody says. I can't tell the difference which one's better, but
Where does it park?
It's all the way on by Alpar.
yeah. There's one at Alco, and then there's one in the parking lot
And
right
then,
here.
like from 11 to 1 or something?
Yeah,
around there?
yeah. So, and they move around a little bit depending on breakfast and other special events. So we work very closely with them. So when we have a special event or something like that, we'll ask them to come by, and you know.
Yes, we will.
Yes.
Thank you.
No, they're great. They're great to work with. A lot of waterfront uses down in this area. Some of you may have seen our new progress report that has come out. And just over this fence, you can see this kind of gray metal structure that's in the water. That's sitting on a barge. So, cloud computing. They expect to do. It's a prototype project for cloud computing. As many of you know, you want to turn left at the end of this building. As many of you know, cloud computing, the major expense associated with cloud computing is keeping it cool. Well, this is a prototype project where they would pump water through in cold climates in order to cool the equipment, and that reduces their costs by about 60%. So we're just going to get out here and take a quick look at Factory OS. Factory OS is a, you can actually just drive up sort of right behind that black car. He's not going anywhere. The second one. Yeah. Keep going a little further.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So Factory OS is just getting going. Factory OS, the OS start stands for off-site. So this is off-site modular construction, primarily apartments and condominiums. It was started by Larry Pace of Cannon Constructors and Rick Holliday of Holliday Development. Many of you may have heard of Rick. He's a longtime developer. Was sort of a founding member of Eden and Bridge Housing, 2 affordable housing developers. So this is a fascinating building, especially if you've never been in it. So come on in.
gave it to you.
Very similar to the building that we were just looking at, except this one's on steroids. This is about 4 times as big, maybe 5 times as big as the last one, 6,000 square feet of floor area. But you can start to get a sense for the electricity and the infrastructure that's here. It's really not the walls that are out of here, it's the piles that are under the building in order to be able to pull up all these cranes. So there's 5 cranes on one row, and the largest crane in here is a 50,000-pound crane. So another really cool thing about this building, like many buildings in there, motion sickness at all, it sort of made you a little queasy just to watch it because the whole building was going back and forth like that. I don't know. I don't know if they ever put it on YouTube. I just saw it sort of the day of. They've got 60 jobs now. They expect to have another 50 more within the next 12 months. And we're hoping that I'll show you the building on the way out, but the Netflix 13 Reasons Why people have to sort of keep going over the corner. And we're going to probably have a parking problem in about another 30 days. And we can't wait. That's one of the things that when you start projects like this, you really look forward to is the first parking. That means you're sort of you're happy to do that. Any questions? Amazon, okay, the question was when we were on the tour, the Amazon experience. I'm not sure that's here at Factory OS. The Amazon, there's been a lot of media recently that Lennar Homes, so our home building division, and Amazon teamed up on a partnership for a smart home. And so that's all over the internet. It just happened in the last week or so, actually.
You go into the models and you'll say like turn on party mode and the shades come down, the TV will start playing music videos. It's cool.
Yeah, and it's going to be standard in all the Lennar homes on a go-forward basis. And it started really out as a security issue between locking doors and having cameras and things like that. But it's now turned into everything this gentleman just described.
It's all powered through the little wizard. It's Amazon's.
So if you're into technology, you ought to take a look at it. It's pretty incredible. Yes. So the question was, in terms of the jobs in this facility, how does somebody go about tapping into something like that? And the answer is, I know there's a tab on their website. And I know that they're looking for people. They've struck a deal with the carpenters union. So everybody that you see behind me in the orange and green vests are all part of the carpenters union out of Solano County. And I will tell you, you really can't see it here. Well, you can see it with the gentleman in the orange hard hat over here. He's walking underneath a structure right now that allows, in modular building, it allows you to build it much more efficiently in sections. And so there's a couple of things that the workers really like about this facility. First of all, it's indoors. You don't have to work outdoors. Secondly, you know, a lot of people that work in construction in San Francisco and Oakland work in the outline or live in the outlying counties. So, would you rather spend 20 minutes in your car, or would you rather each way, or an hour and 20 minutes each way? So they really like working here. The other thing is that it allows you to put a ceiling upside down on a platform like that, and, for example, screwing a sheetrock while you're standing on top of it. So
that's amazing.
Has anybody's ever tried to hold a 4x8 piece of sheetrock above your head and screw it in and get it right every time? It's backbreaking work. So that's some of these facilities really allow for the worker and their employees to honestly have a much better day.
Work smarter, not harder.
Exactly. The question was, what did happen with Blue Homes? Blue's model was one of custom home in a modular manufacturing facility, and they essentially used the cost of labor here in California and where the customer base was, they just couldn't make it work. And in a factory, as many of us know, Henry Ford was the guy. You need to make a lot of the same thing. You need to be really good at making a lot of the same thing. And so this is more of a lot of the same things, more along those lines. Whereas Blue is much more custom home. If you ever went to a Blue home, or if you get a chance to go to these models, I mean, they're gorgeous homes. Very high quality, very efficient, a great place to live. But the question is, can you make money? They are still in business. They still have the models up here, and they actually start an office on their island called Alden Park. They manufacture out of Idaho.
Somehow with cheaper rent.
The labor in California, when you put it side by side, especially when you're talking about taxes and benefits, there is a significant difference. I mean, it's not just people talking in the newspaper or on the news. It's a real thing. And in the case of this facility now, what's the difference? Well, number one, it's more of the same thing, as we just talked about. But they're also very close to a very high demand area. I believe if you go onto their website, it's something like 20. They can build it for 20% less. Well, if you can do that in the Bay Area, and you can offer a lot of supply, all of a sudden you've got the market. And so really that's a lot of what they're trying to do.
Is the union on there? Is the carpenter's office?
The question is the carpenters and their offices, their facilities on your island? No. The union facilities there's some in Vallejo, but the majority of them are up in Fairfield off Chadwick Road. But we have both union businesses and non-union businesses out here. And, from our standpoint, we want business and investment. And whether those are union jobs or non-union jobs is really not a factor for us. They all get along. They use each other. So it's a really nice sort of mix to the business. Okay, let's hop back on the boat. feel like it.
Yeah, I bet you do. You've been here 20 years.
Spend a little more time on Mare Island than I do.
So it's happy to
Whereabouts
see
you live?
the blue basin
Oh, nice.
picked up.
Not bad.
Yeah, it's also not. The only,
You're welcome.
yeah.
We were talking about it. I
Yeah.
realized they had it in the back.
Thank you.
If these were single built homes, the contractors could go and ask me how much they would flash pan, light metal
taco
work.
truck around the corner.
Whereas here, they say, hey, you brought him to me.
Need another one?
So, but I didn't think that was big. No, you love to stack up there.
So one of the concepts that we also have on Mare Island are shared parking lots. As many of you know, the Navy built buildings wherever they wanted. They were not subject to local or state building regulations, and so as a result, they could put parking lots anywhere they wanted. And so when you get back into these areas, there's no setbacks, there's no parking, there's none of that type of stuff. So we had to create these shared parking lots, which has actually worked out really, really well. And we hope to continue that into the future. This is XKT Engineering on your left. And XKT is one of the original pioneers. They've been here for now over 25 years. As you can see in their shop, they do some really heavy-duty stuff. And their most visible project is that if you've been in and out of the San Francisco International Terminal, all those white trusses at SFO were all built here on Mare Island, moved to the water, put on a barge to the end of the runway, and moved to the airport that way. It never hit the roads.
What's the company that's over there?
XKT Engineering. This building here is Film Mare Island or Netflix or Paramount or the Sound Studio. So behind those doors is several sound studios, and it's the stage for the high school on 13 Reasons Why. And if you go in there, it's fascinating what they can do now with technology and lighting and things like that.
Where was Matrix film?
Pardon?
Where was part of the Matrix film?
You know, I don't remember that. I don't remember. I remember the movie, but I don't remember where it was filmed. There were a lot of filming. Patch Adams was out here. Sphere was out here. A couple other Disney movies.
Do they
But
offer tours in there? Or
they
go in?
no, but if you want to be an extra, you can spend a lot of time sitting around waiting for your moment. But it's a lot of young people lying on blankets on the floor, waiting for their moment.
They don't market their business there, huh?
No, they
They're
don't.
Very low key.
No, it's very left here. It's very, very low key because they don't want people coming in. In fact, when they're filming outside, they probably have 30 security people keeping people away because they don't want people pirating to come out and taking pictures. We have to drop, when we go into that building, even us, we have to drop our phones so we don't take pictures.
And they're going to be over on the other side.
Well, that's part of the proposal. I mean, honestly, we're hoping that it just becomes an industry out here, and that they stay there because there's other buildings that are leased to their contractors and their partners. So on your right is Mare Island Dry Dock. Mare Island Dry Dock is that's Dry Dock 2, which is the Polar Star. That's the largest icebreaker in the U.S. fleet, and it comes in. It's now come in for the last 3 years. You can't see the propellers, but that ship has 3 huge propellers on the back of it. It's fascinating how large they are. And one of the things that you'd never, that I never knew about icebreakers anyway, is that the propellers are actually feathered so that you can make them go like this essentially. Because when you're breaking ice, you want to keep it in one gear at all times, and so the way to back up and ram ice is to not put it in reverse, but to feather the propellers so it backs you up, and then you ram it again, but you're always in the same forward gear essentially, which is why they have to replace the propellers once a year, but it's a lot cheaper than replacing the engine. This is one of our newer projects here. This is building 106, as you can see. And if you want to just stop here for a second. Again, back to the August 2014 earthquake. If we had been sitting here at 4:25 in the morning, the front of that building would have been on top of the bus. So the facade of this building fell off. So the facade has been reconstructed, and it's now seismically okay. And we just got done demoing the building on the south side, which will create access and parking for that side of the building. And we hope to bring this building online for lease, probably at the end of the year. We've got a lot of flooring issues and things like that to deal with. Okay, go ahead. In the middle of some very great and significant historic buildings that are more than 100 years old, are brand new buildings. And so the brand new buildings are much easier to lease because they're obviously in much better condition. When the Navy went in and demolished all those brick buildings in order to create this, it created a little bit of an inconsistency and some challenges as far as land use compatibility, but we sort of got through it.
They ever thought about changing the paint colors?
We're not quite to the paint color changing mode yet, but we're getting there. We do about $500,000 of paint work every year. We do about $1.5 million of hang on 1 second, just right here for a second. I was trying to get him before he turned the corner, but if you can back up just for a second. Right on your right is Dry Dock 3. It's actually the largest dry dock on the island, and it's about 600 and something feet long, 625 feet long or so. And between these two dry docks, they repaired literally hundreds of ships, probably thousands over a period of, these dry docks were completed in 1942, 44. So really the end of World War II on. And then they had a lot of submarine work that took place. And in order to protect the submarine work from satellite and spying and things like that, they had tarps over the top of it. And some of the tarps had submarines painted on the top, and some were empty in order to try and fool whoever was looking to not know whether there was actually a submarine in the dry dock or not. And so all these facilities are related to that. And then right where the guy on the forklift is driving, there's about 3 stories of underground mechanical operations down there. So right underneath there, you access it through a hole over on this end, and all the pumps and all the pipes and all that type of thing are actually down underneath where those crane rails are right now. Those crane rails are operable, so you could bring any of these cranes and the ones that are back there all through here, and they're, like I said, they're 100% operational. Okay, so go ahead.
Is this still run by the military, or?
No, it's run by a company called Mare Island Dry Dock, which is a private entity, and they do a lot of government work, but they also do a lot of private work too. Right out here is Dry Dock 1. That was the original dry dock that was built on Mare Island. Just like 50 other, historic resources on Mare Island. That's actually a national landmark. Just like the chapel, just like the mansions and things like that. We're still undergoing a lot of environmental work, so this building on your right is still undergoing that work. We just last fall received another new round of funding in conjunction with the Navy, and so we're well on our way to hopefully completing the environmental work in the next 2 or 3 years. But it's been a real struggle to get to that point. But we're getting the light is at the end of the tunnel. Turn right up here. So on your left is Alden Park, one of the historic parks out on Mare Island. Those are all bomb shelters. All those concrete buildings are all bomb shelters that were built pretty much after World War II. After World War I. And they could be reused for storage or maybe wine cellars, things like that. The oldest remaining building on Mare Island is on your right. That's building 46. It's now being used by the Mare Island Museum, and it was completed in 1854. Coming up on the right is going to be really the connection between Alden Park and the historic core. And then building 45, I mentioned before, this is the new distillery on Mare Island, and you can see some of the barrels, or you should be able to see some of the barrels through the windows. Yeah, that's all. All those have, I think, whiskey in them, and they're all aging. So go ahead and go around the corner by that blue tarp, and then we're going to get out one more
When
time.
are they going to open up and let us taste it?
So they had a little bit of a soft opening just a couple of weeks ago, and they will be open to the public later this summer, but we don't have a date from them yet. Go turn right here. Yeah. So we're going to get out one more time and just kind of take a look down in the historic core. After the fence, turn right. Actually, after the stop sign, turn right. Savage and Cook. That's it's a distillery.
Oh, that's the
for
name.
whiskey, rye, and then they import tequila. So just go up by that white truck dead ahead.
Do you know what that brick building over there used to be across from?
That was actually the main administration building at the time of closure. And maybe while we're walking around, you can turn around if you want to get out of here. Okay, so we'll make one more stop here.
Okay, now watch your head. Okay. That worked.
Yeah, exactly. It's just the second.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I don't know what I have on.
It's a great,
I'm sure I wouldn't be
No, that's right. I'm not making this up. That's his question.
Looks like a fan on that side, though.
So, as part of the master plan for Mare Island, you now have a sense that it's a true mixed-use community. It's actually, if you include the North Island, it's about 70% commercial and about 30% residential, at least of the developable area. But a big part of Mare Island was to be able to open up the Vallejo waterfront, in essence, be able to take advantage of this really great geography and great climate that the city of Vallejo has. And so I mentioned Alden Park because Alden Park and Chapel Park represent the connection for the residential area and the west side of the island to the east side of the island. So this will be a very public area that will eventually be rededicated or given back to the city of Vallejo, and then it allows you to move down to the waterfront. So you can see, we've been putting in, the first thing we had to do was demolish a bunch of equipment underneath these gantries. I'll talk about the gantries here in a second, but it essentially creates this public access underneath the gantries all the way down to the waterfront. And it was, a relatively simple but nice solution because we don't want pedestrians and we don't want bicycles and things like that out next to that building because this is kind of an industrial area where people have trucks and things like that. And so, again, one of our jobs was just sort of simple compatibility. How do you keep different uses separated? And the easy answer to that was, build a public area underneath these gantries. And then it turns left, and then eventually that waterfront with benches and lights and garbage cans and things like that will go past the ferry, which we'll swing through there in a second, and then we'll ultimately connect all the way to the causeway, and then the North Island developer will pick it up at that point and connect it to Highway 37, which also has a walkway, so you'll really be able to ride your bike or walk from the other side, two different ways, get over here, and then ultimately go all the way down to the South Shore or take the open space path all the way out to San Pablo Bay. So it creates a really great opportunity for the community. This area, like I said, will ultimately be taken over by the city of Vallejo. There's kayaking opportunities and those opportunities to access the water here. But this area is actually fascinating unto itself. So this is the distillery. This is really the aging room on the left, and then the concrete structure is going to be the tasting room that will eventually be open to the public. And then the distillery itself is actually the building 65 there on the right. So the interesting story here is that these buildings were mostly launch ships. You can see the picture. We're sort of standing in the lower left-hand corner of that photograph where they're launching that ship, and you can see the cranes that go overhead. So just like the big buildings down here, they had their own bridge cranes. They actually built ships here and then launched them back into Mare Island Strait. So those two buildings used to be the same size. They used to be the exact same building. But when the U.S. Navy decided that they needed a new class of destroyer, which essentially were longer, and they decided to build the USS California here on Mare Island, which I believe that the California, I don't think it's the one on the left, I actually think it's the one on the right. They needed a longer building ways. So they cut that building in half and took off the higher roof, and that's how that building ended up that way. They poured the concrete because they needed something to pull to hold the ship in the building ways, and so they literally tied it to that. And so there's pictures of dignitaries, launching the ship with the bottle of champagne. They're all standing up on top of that. There's bunting hung from around that side, and they're up there, hitting the bottle of champagne for these kinds of events. In fact, you see the picture on the lower left. Those people are standing on top of that building. So it's a fascinating story about how the Navy would do anything they needed to do, especially in wartime, or could be wartime, in order to meet the defense needs of the country. So really, I didn't know that actually until Savage and Cook started to do the research on these buildings. The owner of Savage and Cook, who's also David Finney, who's also part of the Nimitz Group, and his entire team for that matter, the superintendent, are real history buffs and really appreciate the history and the fabric of what Mare Island meant to this community. And so they did a great job. Savage and Cook were just two gentlemen who worked in these buildings. That's how they came up with the name. So, kind of a fun story. And eventually the Mare Island Museum will be open, more to the public. So what we're doing right now is that we are repainting all of these gantries. And so they're all, of course, like everything else on Mare Island, full of lead-based paint asbestos. So that's what you see going on out there. A particularly difficult and complex job because it's over water, and you can't let that stuff get in water. And so they do the sandblasting and lead-based paint, and then they come back in and paint it. So eventually we will get to all of them. These were actually the first three. We had to experiment with the type of paint and what was most effective, and so then had to let it sit for a while and see how fast things either rusted or deteriorated, and see what paint flaked and things like that. So because this is such a big project, we do a lot of sort of experimenting like that about the best ways to do things. Because if you get it right, then it not only saves you a lot of money, but it saves a lot of time in the long run too. So the experimenting with how to get the lead-based paint, taken care of over water and not violate any laws is a really important process. Because the time alone, if you have to shut down and deal with stuff like that, is really important. The other thing that we are very sensitive to, anytime that we do work like that over here, the prevailing winds are from the northwest, so they blow this way. So we're very concerned about everything from air quality to odors that end up blowing towards the city of Vallejo. So any questions from the historic core perspective?
Are we close to the Mare Island Brewery and Coal Sheds Art?
Yeah.
Is that way?
I think it's that way.
It's along that way, and we actually are just a few minutes ahead of schedule. If you want, we can hustle down there and walk in and show that to you. No tasting. No tasting from
Which class year was it that ruined that for everyone?
Yeah, I know.
It'll be year 2.
Weren't you year 2, Roger?
Was there a tasting day before?
No. They'll neither confirm or deny that situation that took place.
So I have a quick question.
Yes, sir.
So now you fine tune the process with repainting these. How long will it take?
So we'll do that by the end of this year, and then we'll start on the next one. So it'll be a couple years. Okay, back to the bus.
Actually, you're right.
All right, Bill. That's cool. It's neat.
Yeah, so it had cables that were supposed to lower it slowly, but the cables failed. So it just went free gravity down the ramp.
Schedule as this site, but it's really great that we can now advertise to businesses and residents that you can take the ferry to and from Mare Island. So after the coal sheds parking. Yeah. And I gotta see if both gates are open. Looks like left side. Yeah, I can get through that. Okay. So we're gonna head into the coal sheds, and this is where Mare Island Brewing is, but it'll give you an idea of some of the plans and some of the opportunities along the waterfront. This project is a little bit stalled out at the moment because we've run into some significant infrastructure issues in the alley right behind me, trying to maneuver through some. In short, the quay wall along the waterfront is held up by large concrete beams that actually are in bedrock all the way back here. And we didn't know that it was so far back, and so you can imagine when you plan to run storm drain, which goes by gravity, it requires to be a certain height in order to get to the outfall on the straight. And if you go too low, you got to pump it. And so we ran into that issue. We're still trying to figure it out with flail, flood, and wastewater. This is good, thanks. But that's, interestingly enough, when we were repaving the area that we just hit, or that we were just visiting, when we went to grind the asphalt in order to do the overlay, we ran into two buildings that no one knew they were there. And so these are some of the, they had been demolished at floor level, so the flooring was still under the pavement. But but this is again how things were constructed on Mare Island. There was no, there's no building permit. There was no planning commission. There was no. Another really great example: 99 elevators on Mare Island when we first arrived. Not a single elevator had ever been inspected by the state of California. So if you're in the building industry, you know what that means. Elevators are heavily regulated and heavily inspected, and it's all done by the state of California. So we are slowly getting most of those elevators back up and running again. So let's take a quick look at the coal sheds. Oh, well, before we start, Kent, come on in. So before we start on the coal sheds, this is the leadership layout group. So many of you already know Kent as a result of maybe the tap room on the other side. But this is Kent Portner, one of the founders of Mare Island Brewing Company, along with Ryan Gibbons, his partner. And they have been a kind of a cornerstone partner for us here on Mare Island. Have done a wonderful job of not only building a great business, but honestly promoting this project and also the city of Vallejo. So if you've got any questions for Kent, like, when's the next free beer tasting or anything like that?
That's coming.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I'm talking to you guys later on today, actually. So.
Oh, he is?
I was trying to figure out when the tour bus was here, and I was like, we better get the bar open if we got 50 people coming in in a couple minutes. So.
Are you doing it here?
No, I'm meeting them over at somewhere.
Medic.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So I was just going to show them the coal sheds.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Happy to.
Okay.
If you want. Yeah.
Let's go.
I've got a sew.
I forgot it was sitting here. I didn't hear it was sitting here, but I wanted to.
Okay. So one of the questions that I got is what's going to happen with the rest of the coal sheds, and also there was an artist community in there for probably the last 15 years or so. So what we did is we relocated all the businesses that were here, including the artists. So now the artist studio is in a building on the other side of this building right now. What we're doing with these is primarily roof and structural work, and you can see the roof work going on right now. And what we're doing is we're holding off on anything else below the roof and below the structure of the trusses, because if we have to resolve the storm drain issue by cutting through these buildings, then we're going to have to deal with that. So we're not running electricity in any major work below the truss line. But these are national landmarks, so these buildings have to stay. As many of you know, it's much more expensive to deal with historic buildings than to build buildings brand new. Toro is finding out that right now, and it's a real challenge. On the other hand, it's really what makes Mare Island Mare Island. We get a lot of inquiries from people looking for 50,000 square feet, and they want a traditional warehouse building. I'm going to turn right here. Traditional warehouse building, and we tell them, we say, look at these buildings, and if this isn't for you, there's no reason to go any farther. You should go to Fairfield, you should go to Benicia, you should go to Sassoon. And so we're pretty definitive about that. But when you start looking at buildings like this one here and some of these brick buildings, it's a much more interesting place to work, and it's a much more interesting place for your customers to come. We find even people that come to our office building, we've got historic photos in all the hallways. We'll have a meeting break up at 10 o'clock, and at 11 o'clock there's still people walking up and down the hallways looking at the photos and reading the small captions underneath. So that's what makes this place special. So go up to that large building on the left, 599, and turn left. Okay. This area is much more open through here, and this will be where development or build-to-suits can take place. You can see that there will be access to the water. Out this way, there'll be views of Mount Tamalpais and the wetlands, and So this is where those opportunities are going to come from, and we are now starting finally to get much more interest along those lines from larger companies wanting to locate here. On your right is Alstom Transportation, and we'll be able to look in the last roll-up door, or really last accordion door on your right, and I'm not sure what they have in here right now. Those are actually the light rail vehicles from the LA Metro system. So they truck those up here and then they refurbish them here on Mare Island. The interesting thing about trucking those up here is they do them 2 at a time. And if you ever get a chance and you're driving through and you see a very complicated, huge, long trailer with all kinds of hydraulic hoses and things like that parked in that parking lot, it means that they just brought up to that morning. They had to build a special truck in order to do it with special rear braking to bring it down the grapevine. Without the grapevine, they could have brought it up on normal, trucking mechanism. It's a fascinating piece of machinery. And then to the right of that, you really can't see it because it's dark and the cars are dark also, but they're doing Rocky Mountaineer retrofitting. So the Rocky Mountaineer is that kind of famous railroad that goes through the Canadian Rockies from somewhere in Whistler or Calgary all the way to Vancouver. And if you look, they actually advertise in the Vallejo Times-Herald. But they're doing retrofits of those here. And then their other main source of business is Amtrak. They do a lot of Amtrak, ADA, bike racks, new carpet, new upholstery, new air conditioning, things like that.
They did the new BART trains here?
They didn't. They bid on them, but didn't get the work. So just go straight across. So any final questions? Yes.
Harness. Where'd they go?
Oh, they went right behind us in a
So
building.
they're right there.
Yeah, right along the waterfront.
Do they rent, or does Lennar?
They
'cause
rent.
They did so much to enhance Vallejo.
Yeah, no, they rent space from us. Yeah. So, Lisa, are you guys going to keep the bus, or are you? That's it. Okay. So you want to turn right here? Okay. Another interesting story is the frontage to our office building here. When we first arrived, before we retrofitted it, they had made office space out of the porch, and there was a bunch of plywood and windows covering those archways. Same on the sister building, obviously, is the school district building. It was the same over there too.
The Navy did that?
The Navy did that, yeah.
Just need a little more square footage?
Yeah, and that was, it would originally was a enlisted officers' quarters. So if you brought your submarine in, for example, for 6 months of repairs, you lived here. So it really looked like a rundown Motel 6 when we first took it over. That building is 100% leased right now. Yeah, there's Caltrans is in there, Toro is in there. Mare, which is a subsidiary of Mitsubishi that does auctions in America, is in there. So there's Alstom actually has the large portion of the second floor. So thank you everyone very much. If you have any follow-up questions, there's a few people who know how to get a hold of me.
Thank you so much for all your time.
You bet.
Thank you.
Okay, have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay.